I'm Lake Miller.
And I'm Hannah Brown. Welcome to Gem City Diversity, a podcast where we talk about diversity and inclusion in the Dayton area.
We're from the National Conference for Community and Justice of Greater Dayton, or NCCJ. NCCJ works in the Miami Valley to increase understanding around the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
In this episode, Lake talks with Amanda Northcutt, the Prevention Education Coordinator for Visible and Resilient. They discuss what Visible and Resilient is, creating an inclusive program, how intersectionality plays a role, suicide prevention for LGBTQIA+ youth, and how you can work to be an ally and advocate. Enjoy!
Well, thank you for taking some time to chat with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So, want to talk a little bit about Visible and Resilient and the important work that you are doing in the community. I'm guessing that some of our listeners have not heard of Visible and Resilient before. So, would you mind just taking a moment to kind of let us know what Visible Resilient is?
Visible and Resilient is a youth-informed, education-based SOGI inclusive program that is working towards increasing health equity for LGBTQIA+ youth in Montgomery County. As we have seen the historic and systemic marginalization, specifically with the Q+ group. I will say Q+, and by no means of offending or excluding. We actually, and I say we, Rochelle and myself, use Q+ as more of an inclusive way to encompass all, because we keep adding those letters on there and to not leave anyone out. So we're kind of going back and unpacking the youth informed. We actually do have both middle and high school age youth who hang out with us in the sense of they're informing and, like, hey, what's going on in your world? What does it look like at school? What does it look like, at home? And so getting that narrative from a youth, and then what can we do? Like, how can we support? What would be of interest? We have youth that are helping update social media sites, creating Canva posters. So it's truly a youth-informed program, which I think is really cool because we have a multi-generational piece of youth, and then it kind of goes up to, we have some Miami students that are involved in VNR as well. So then we have the 20-year-olds, and then it steps up to, myself, Rochelle. So we kind of hit all the age groups. And I think that brings a really cool component to the program. We use the SOGI, again, to be inclusive instead of going through the LGBTQIA+. SOGI, you're looking at sexual orientation, gender identity expression. So kind of encompassing all of that in an inclusive way. And so we throw that out there because that's actually our presentation. We often incorporate that, and people are like, what is that? So looking at that, it is an education-based program. Rochelle Froboda, who is the creator of VNR, was a sexuality educator at Miami University for way more years than I can remember. She now has a really long title at Public Health and is there. But so looking at how the program was created, very much based on scholarship and an education piece. For myself personally, I was a middle childhood educator. So I was a teacher in Dayton Public prior to jumping on with VNR. So I feel like we're very informed and very much take the approach of an educational lens for the program itself. We again, like to focus that we are a SOGI inclusive program, because while we specifically focus on Q+ youth, the program is inclusive with the idea that we want all young people who want to be involved. We understand the importance, A, of intersectionality, and B, advocates and allies, and how crucial they are to help build community. And create that space. So it's a short description, but a very lengthy explanation. So hopefully we didn't put anyone to sleep there.
No, thank you. That was great. And for those, I know you just talked a little bit about looking at intersectionality and your inclusion. For people who maybe aren't so familiar with intersectionality, can you talk about what that looks like when you're talking about the Q plus community?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're looking at Q plus youth, intersectionality is looking at those different identities. Obviously, being a part of the LGBTQIA plus community would be an intersectional identity in the sense that it's an identity that has been oppressed, has been discriminated against. But then when you factor in other identities for folks, so like our youth of color, our youth that have disabilities, whether it be physical, whether it be a mental disability, then we're looking at how those experiences sort of cross and how they affect any person, but we specifically focus on young people's walks of life. And so looking at my experience as a white female, it's going to be inherently different than a Black female's experience and how we have walked the world and how those narratives are created. And so specifically looking at the queer community, when we're looking at things, especially like mental health and suicide attempts or ideation, what we're seeing, and when I say what we're seeing, what we've historically seen that is still continuing, is that adding in those intersecting identities, it takes those rates up. So you're looking right now at 42% of LGBTQIA plus youth have considered and or attempted suicide in the past year. Half of those individuals being either transgender or non-binary. Then you look at taking that up and adding on factors like Black youth that are also identify in the Q plus community, and those statistics raise. And so with those intersectional identities, it continues to increase. And I always like to make sure when I'm talking to youth, especially, we, and I say the we as adults tend to, when we're talking about things, tell youth, well, you're at risk if you belong to this community or that community. And I feel like that could be taken as, well, because of who I am, I'm at risk. And so looking at it from the lens of, you're not at risk because of who you are, you're at risk because of how society is treating you and because of the systems that are in place currently. And systems do what systems were put in place to do. And unfortunately, still that is to uplift some and not others. And so it has nothing to do with who you are. It's these failing systems that groups like VNR and NCCJ are trying to disrupt, to look at creating those equitable environments for all people.
And I think that's a great way to look at it. I think sometimes when we talk about these statistics with our youth as well, it can be really discouraging to our LGBTQ plus youth who feel as though from the beginning they were kind of dealt a hand that maybe is not the same hand that somebody else is being dealt, right? Like, we know that LGBTQ people are dying of suicide at dramatically higher rates than their heterosexual cisgender counterparts, right? And like, I think as we see these trends, it's so hard not to ignore it, but I think it can also be really difficult for our young people to see those trends and look at their path and look at their future kind of journey. Now, are those trends or intersections improving? I know people, especially around the LGBTQ space, like to really talk about how far we've gone, but I have a sense that we have so far yet to go.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the data is not changing, for 20 plus years. And so suicide is the leading cause of death among Q plus youth. And yeah, statistics aren't changing. And you hate to dismiss the progress that has been made, right? But to your point, we have so much further to go in so many ways. And yeah, looking at the kids, because we're talking as adults how stressful this can be. And when you're a kid looking at all these things going on, around you, things that, and I use the word privilege not in a negative sense, although I feel like, majority groups often take them that way. When you're walking the world as a non-majority, group, I think you don't see the stressors that are just kind of packed into a day. Anything from when I go to the locker room, where am I going to get changed? Where am I going to go to the bathroom? When I go to this class, is this teacher going to affirm who I am? Is someone going to say something? And so I think it's, imagine being in that space all the time and not knowing, kind of where you fit. And so again, we've made the progress, and we're definitely having more conversations. I mean, I think having groups that, are having the conversations and giving you those places are there. And so progress is being made, but unfortunately, we're not pushing. And when I say we're not pushing it, we are pushing. Things aren't being pushed far enough currently, where obviously where we need it to be for these kids.
Yeah, and I think that we oftentimes have this kind of mentality in the United States of celebrating these early victories and then almost kind of giving up. In our last podcast episode, we talked about Gym City Market, right? And how for some people, the building of the Gym City Market was like, all right, we did it, right? Like we closed the food desert in West Dayton. We opened a food store. But this is not it's a victory, but it's not the end of all the issues. The food desert is not a food oasis now. And I see that similar thing happening here where like, I'm assuming for some people, like gay marriage became legalized and folks were like, all right, we've come so far. The problem is solved. In the same way, I think even that some people, saw a Black president and said racism has now disappeared. But we know that all of these things are untrue. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I almost think what's happening is there are folks who use those as platforms to say those very things as, well, look, you can get married or, you have, and it's almost like used against people, I feel like, of, marginalized groups because, well, you can, do this and that. And why do we need Pride Month? Or it's been questioned a lot, looking at GSAs or diversity alliances, well, we don't have straight alliances and, we don't have, alliances for white kids. And so looking at it and what GSAs are intended to be, and not trying to be a smart aleck, but yeah, we do. It's the rest of the country is that. And again, without the intention of offending, but look at what is normalized in every day. When you go into a classroom and you're looking at literature, what's being read in the classroom, how often do you have a Q plus person that is your protagonist? Looking at the staff, the makeup of the staff, who are we primarily seeing in these roles? So the normalization for majority groups is there on the daily, and that's huge. That representation, of people, whereas oftentimes marginalized groups, they don't see that. And for youth not to see who they are represented on a daily basis, that's the intent, of things like a GSA, is to create that space, but also to create a community for, marginalized youth, as well as advocates and allies of, to, have those conversations with, have that space with, and ideally, that continues to expand throughout the school, throughout community. And the true intent is to be a community builder.
Yeah, absolutely. I oftentimes think when we're having this conversation, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg was always quoted saying, like, people would ask, like, well, when are there enough women on the Supreme Court? And she'd be like, we're going to do this work until there are 9, until like everyone. And I was always kind of puzzled by that. But when we when we look at it through this lens that you're talking about, it's like nobody's questioned that norm that was created for so long of like everyone on this court being men, frankly, being cisgendered, heterosexual white men at that, right? And so there's such a drastic difference between having a straight pride group or having a white pride group rather than sharing a group with shared oppression, frankly, shared experiences. And going back to what you had touched on earlier, like for me as a cisgender heterosexual man, there are things that I have never had to consider walking down the street, experiences that I've never had to confront that somebody not sharing those identities may have. So what, I guess, kind of summarizing that from your perspective, like why are these targeted efforts or these targeted groups so vital?
I mean, I think first and foremost, we look at things like mental health. And I think that's the big picture, right? The inequities that we're seeing for a multitude of reasons. And you still see policies and procedures and institutions within, systems that are, favoring non-marginalized groups in a way that is still oppressive, that is still discriminative. And I think when we're looking at that, kind of going back to what you're saying, you don't know what you don't know, right? So like for you or even me in different ways, there are experiences that we will never have, that a lot of people will never have, that we don't know, that we won't understand. And so again, you don't know what you don't know. However, being mindful and, I think looking at the mindset of just because it's not my problem doesn't mean it isn't a problem. And I think for the mental health of folks, for, everyone, looking at how we can function together in a world and in a society where morals are different because our walks of life are different, our experiences are different. And that's okay, but embracing that as opposed to, honing into all those differences and shaming, one or two groups and saying, well, this is wrong. I think, taking a look at the systems, and not in an individualistic way in the sense that like let's blame people, where we're so far past that we just again need to look at systems and what we're reinforcing and what we're telling people. And it doesn't necessarily mean verbally what those systems are telling people. And I think specifically focusing on groups like Q plus youth, or youth of color, these are groups that historically looking have had to fight for basic individual rights, and still looking at scenarios. And when I say inequitable, I don't think it's all the time, up in your face homophobia or up in your face racism, but looking at microaggressions and, that we have been, or implicit biases that we have been trained as individuals for so long that we don't even know we have. I think it's, going back and recognizing those things and looking at how and why they are hurtful, to all people, and kind of honing in on that. But yeah, I think again, specifically for marginalized groups, I have to again go back to these are our kids that are deciding it's better to not live than be here and be who they are. And that's a problem. And I think you take morals out of that, anyone's morals, and I can't imagine that anyone thinks that dead kids is okay. I can't think that. And so, looking at it even from an education lens, there doesn't have to be I agree with you, It's not that type of thing. As a teacher, there were a lot of kids that I didn't agree with on a daily basis. However, going into public education, you don't get to pick your kids, and they are your kids for that whole year. And then they become your kids, and that's how you refer to them, right? You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to understand them every day, but you have to see them and you have to affirm who they are and support who they are as a person. And again, I don't think that's a moral thing. I think that's a human thing and also a professional thing because that's the job. And yeah, it was a very lengthy answer. Sorry.
No, that's great. And, we have this conversation a lot about pronouns, actually, where when we talk about pronouns and kind of describe them to people and explain what they are and all of this, oftentimes we have someone respond who's like, well, I just don't get it, right? Like, I just don't get pronouns. And I oftentimes respond and say, well, I'm happy to answer questions that you have. I'm happy to give you more information. But at the end of the day, there's going to be some folks who don't understand, or maybe they don't want to understand, right? But what I oftentimes, especially in our corporate settings, describe to these people is like, there's a few things at play here. First of all, we know these statistics about suicide, and we're contributing to that if we start using dead names or if we start using the wrong pronouns for somebody. But the other piece of it is exactly what you just touched on there at the end, which is like, at the end of the day, this comes down to customer service. Like, what kind of business are you running? Are you respecting your consumers, your students, those folks around you? Because it's really, it's a respect thing. I don't have to agree with everything that somebody says, but at the very least, me as a human being needs to respect the other human beings that I'm sharing, cohabitating this space with. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I ironically find in school spaces, which I go back to that just because that's primarily where, we hang out. But I'm looking at youth and this Gen Z that's coming up. They're pretty fluid. They're pretty, kind of roll with it. Oftentimes, unfortunately, it's the adults in the space that are the problem. And it does go back to the, well, I just don't understand it. This kid went by they, them, and now, we're switching to he, they, or whatever it is. And so the conversation goes, okay, and how does that affect you? How does it affect me to use someone's pronouns that they're asking me to use? It doesn't. Well, what if I mess them up? Well, then you mess them up and you apologize and go on. Just like if you call a kid the wrong name, which I did on a daily basis. When you have 100 and some kids, it's probably going to happen. I call my own kids the wrong name sometimes. It happens. Sometimes I call them the dog's name in the heat of the moment, and so it's just apologizing and moving forward, because at the end of the day, I don't think anyone expects perfection. I think that it's effort. And I think it's very much the same with names and asking to be called a different name. I don't view it as any different than a nickname. If a kid uses a nickname, you would try your best to always remember that nickname, or you'd write it down on a seating chart or something. And that's what you would call the kid, whether it's their personal, journey and them trying to figure things out for themselves or not. That's where they're at right now. And I think it goes back to meeting people where they're at.
So this kind of brings up for me something that we've run into a lot of conversations about. And this is individuals fearing like doing the wrong thing. Like, hey, I'm going to be an ally, I'm going to be an advocate. But for a lot of people, there's that hesitation of like, well, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I try to help and I inadvertently make it worse, right? Like you said, we're talking about systems that have been around longer than our country's even been around. These systems have been formed. And so for folks that can be like really overwhelming, I don't know how, I don't even know how we overcome this, but do you have any advice for those folks who are kind of approaching this conversation and saying like, well, what if I make a mistake? What if I do the wrong thing? What if I try to help and I make it worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, that's probably our number one ask right now for professional development. We've gone into several schools lately, and that is the biggest concern for teachers. And I think the first thing is, kudos for having the thought of what if I make it worse, because then that implies that you want to help and make it better. So there's that. And I find, at least in the education realm, that majority of folks are in the space of I just don't know. And so those people, it's very easy, have a group, come visible and resilient. We offer professional development. We'll come in, we'll come back as many times as you need us to and cover whatever topics you need us to cover. But I think it's gaining that information, but also giving yourself the grace of you're not going to get everything right and you're going to live and learn every day. If you have relationships built up with folks in the Q plus community, and you have the relationship to where if you say or do something that is offensive, they're going to let you know, and then they're going to tell you. But I think educating yourself the best that you can, and again, not expecting perfection, because it is a huge cultural shift. There's a lot of changes. There's a lot of terminology that is continuing to be added. And I think it again stems from doing the best that you can. And when you mess up, and you apologize and you move on. And I think, again, going back to being human, that's going to happen. But I, again, also think reinforcing that educate yourself, and recognizing that there are some experiences you won't understand. However, I think the other piece of that is, with the recognition of the experience, recognizing that, with the intersectional piece, everyone's walk of life is different, and being mindful of that. And I think that that's in all spaces, right? That the things we say and we do are going to affect people in different ways. And so being mindful of that piece always. And again, are we going to mess that up sometimes? Absolutely. I've said things, I say things probably all the time that, but it is what it is. But looking back historically at things that I've said, I'm like, that was really stupid. Like I should not have said that. But I think that's a part of the learning process and where we're coming. And again, I think cultural shifts were constantly changing. And I think that along the way, you have those growing pains, and everyone has to give themselves the grace of, we're going to have that.
And so as we kind of start to wrap up our time today, if a young person is interested in getting involved with Visible and Resilient, what options do they have?
Yeah, absolutely. So with Visible and Resilient, we have a website, visibleandresilient.org, that they can go to get in touch with me. My email is on there. So if you email, you will get my email, my response. But what we do is we're currently running drop-ins for both middle and high school youth in a virtual space, sometimes in an in-person setting when we're able to be safe and distance and be cautious there. But we do bi-weekly. So on Tuesdays, we'll do middle school from 5:30 to 6:30. Middle school logs on. The Zoom link is private, so you have to email me. That's for the safety of youth that are in this space. And we talk about lots of different things, do lots of different activities. And it's, again, youth informed based on, hey, what do you want to learn about? What do you want to talk about? What should we do? High school follows right directly after. And so they're 6:30 to 7:30. What the calendars for each month get posted up. So it's on the website, it's on social media. They can get in touch with it. We also do in-person stuff. We toured a food bank last month. We're going to jump into some volunteer activities. We've gone to Ritter's Ice Cream, lots of community stuff. On Wednesday, I am actually pulling some of the youth to do our pop-up station at one of the libraries in Dayton. We have a Thank a Teacher initiative going on, so we'll be hanging out at the library, having community members fill out thank you cards. We'll also have a button maker, which is awesome. People really seem to get excited about making and designing buttons. So we have that going on as well. But then we'll also, VNR will be hanging out at one of the branches of the library, and we'll be doing activities there every other Friday. And again, to get all that information, I just ask that people reach out to either myself or someone in the organization, just to ensure safety of everyone who comes to the spaces that we're in. But we do both virtual and in-person drop-ins. The other thing that I'm heavily into is if schools in Montgomery County have GSAs or diversity alliances, I can come in and do activities and hang out there. There are several schools in Montgomery County that we are currently doing. We go in and do activities and different things depending on what that group specifically wants. And we offer that option. And then adults in the space, we do professional development. So we've been in schools, we've been at the ESC, we've kind of been a little bit of all over, middle schools, high schools. We have some elementary teachers now saying like, hey, there's a need, and we're going, yes, we know. But we also did some book clubs last summer. So we kind of are all over doing lots of different things, but reaching out, I can get calendar invites and links to whoever, and visibleandresilient.org is the best place to get hooked up there.
Great. Well, Amanda, I appreciate your time. Is there anything else that you want to add today?
No, I don't think so. I appreciate you having, me on here, and I know that we're going to be out a little bit for December, but we will be full force January and starting things, and again, kind of expanding around Montgomery County.
Well, great. Well, excited to see all of the things that you and your youth are accomplishing here throughout Montgomery County. And thank you for everything you do to support the community.
Yeah, thank you so much.